church where yeah, that's the church that that was famous because it was the place where he wanted to go to Paris, and he was on his way there, and at the village prior to it, they said, "Oh no, you can't get there. It's too far. You have to stay here overnight." So he stayed in that little village overnight. The next day, he goes on horseback. He discovers it was a 20-minute ride. They just wanted him to. Maybe it's happened to something. So you travel, you're on your way to go? You didn't have any trouble with the police? Yeah, same thing with us. We had no issue. We took a road with the road. We were afraid to go. So we got out of the car and walked. It was a big white van, and we wanted to put it in too noticeable. Here's the way we walk. We didn't make it to Edinburgh. So how far is it to Ararat? Because we couldn't find it. So we could have seen the ocean. So nervous. You know, we were going around and we're thinking, and you know, we've been stuck. We've had all our dreams. So for this particular trip, right on the frontier, we got in. I did my photography. I got it. I didn't linger too long at all. Well, it took a while. Where'd you get the money? I'd say later, but and then but you rode it in a taxi? Yeah. You know Mark, when you going in? Yeah. So then you just rode it.
How are you again? How are you?
Hi, Alex. Did you help me out for this?
So this is for the program tomorrow. Yes.
Are you coming to City tomorrow?
So you just got your backpack, your camera here, some water, and
get a free lunch. Coffee I could drink. So probably you're not good.
Well, you gotta take what you can get.
I would use it so much.
I'm cutting you off.
So, the 1% of truth is that he set up that business. man, Danny Tarkanian, set up a telemarketing company that has 13, and if you have $50,000 to run that business, it's one thing, but if you have $3 million to run those ads, it's another thing. And that, you can't oftentimes point to one thing, but that's it. I mean, you guys got a great wife, you got 4 great kids, and he works so, I mean, I was sitting here in this little area with my editing meeting, and he was like right by the 2 chairs behind the wall. I listened to him all day long, making phone calls, talking to people. I went to events with him. He worked very hard, and it turned out not to be closed. It was closed 2 years ago, and he lost like 9 or 10 points or so. Yeah, very, very unfortunate.
There's going to be a swell.
But he called me like a week or 2 before the election from the road. He's like, "Yeah, this Armenian controversy we endorsed Susie Lee." I said, I haven't heard about it. Let me go check. So I checked. I went to her website and Twitter and whatever, and then I Googled it, and Moskowitz had wrote something. And I know why, and I just don't ever, I was sitting there. I was all Peter Tumjan, or whatever his name was, the sheriff in Essex County. The guy came in about second. Yeah. Okay. How many Armenians we have in there? You know how many Armenians we've had with Armenian names in the U.S. Congress? 2. Garunian in the 50s and Shayan in the different presidents. And then we've got people you don't know, like this guy just got elected.
I mean, it could be Armenian. Your name is Armenian.
I'm the guy that says, oh, you don't have an Armenian name, you don't speak Armenian, you didn't go to Armenian camp. Then this guy, Anthony Bernzini, got elected in New York by 1 percentage point. I don't know Armenian, but I think it is his mother, Madri, and that's great. He had a son. It's better, even if it's this much sense of Armenian identity, it's more than Bob Johnson. More than Susie Lee of Las Vegas. He's got more Armenian than Susie Lee.
This is his whole spot with the community, with the Armenian entity. One day we'll sit down and solve it. But sometimes I sit down by myself and I'm thinking, okay, where we should put it. I cannot come up with all of it.
long as we stay where we are, we're good. Right? Yes. I wish I could get it. But I'm not like, I think I was so lucky to get it on the bus and it's so short, so it's almost like a video. Yeah, that was interesting. My dad told me to go on. You know, just, you have? No, he's still unaware. So you guys are like, right? I know. So this is not the time. Yeah, this is a TV trailer. Yeah, mine, yeah.
Yeah.
But everyone is.
So she said she introduced herself knowing that wife. She said, you know, I don't know.
How are you?
I saw your picture.
He's not.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
He was supposed to come. Oh, good. I think Peter was here. He accepted it. But I didn't know like
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You look so nice. Sharon, nice to meet you. Sorry, no. I've been running around like crazy. Anyway, I was okay. 5 minutes. Yes. Oh? You have out of Armin.
I told them to come.
You have a Starbucks? I hope you come.
It's not under.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you do? Yes.
Okay, I was wondering if there was
I'm not gonna actually give a reception here. What's that? Oh.
Is that microphone loud?
When you get back, you can come there.
Okay, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, G capital, U E S, capital, A A A, and then E capital, U E S lowercase. Yes. Yes, but the first initials are capital, the G. We have seats in here, empty seats. We have empty seats here. Okay. Thank you for your patience. If the Bahram's Papa Shamasian was here, he would say, if it's 5 o'clock, we start at 5 o'clock. I apologize. Thank you. Welcome to our Fiji Museum. My name is Maggie Mangasarian-Goshen. I'm the director of the museum, a volunteer director, and I'm very honored to have a special event today. Today's event is collaborated with several organizations, with National Association for Armenian Studies, NASR, that the museum has been working since 2006, collaborating with this organization in Boston, and the representatives are here, Hamas Kain, Nor Serund, and individual Mr. and Mrs. Babian, and of course the Ararat Eskidjo Museum. I'm very happy to see you all today. It takes a lot to bring people from different parts. This is what's going on with the fires from Pasadena, Altadena, from Manhattan, but I'm glad to see you all here. Just briefly about the Ararat Eskidjo Museum before we introduce our speakers. We have bi-monthly lectures at the museum. If you would like to sign in for our events, we have a sign-in sheet, and there's as well for Nasser, and our emails will be only about our events. Just the highlights for this year, we've had a major conference on Armenian Americans. We had other speakers that come in from different parts of the world, and today's event is our last event for this year. Coming up next year, we have a large program prepared beginning in February, where we'll start with I'm sorry, I went blank for a second. We'll start with Dr. Maranchi, Christina Maranchi, who is an architectural historian who's published a new book. She'll be our guest. Dr. Helen Arzestian Watambo, speaker from France, who's a musicologist. Hushamadian Vahetashchan will be coming from Germany, and a few other speakers that we're still finalizing the details. So if you'd like to be on our email list, we welcome you all. Just to introduce you what the event of today is, I'll be inviting Mark Mamigonian, who's the director of the studies at the Nasser organization, who's just come in from Boston today. He will be introducing our speakers, Annie Kevorkian Hovanesian, as well as Stephen Sim, who came all the way from Scotland. And then we'll continue from there. Mark? Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm very happy to be here today with you at the Ararat Eskidjo Museum, to see all of you here. It's a wonderful group and a great crowd. I'm very impressed. It's been my pleasure and my privilege for many years now, and Nasser's pleasure and privilege to work with Maggie Mangasarian Goshen and the Ararat Eskidjo Museum. As she said, it's been 12 years of collaboration together, and it was a very fortunate day for me and for Nasser when Maggie called and said, hey, we like the kind of programs you folks are doing back east at Nasser, can we collaborate? And the answer was yes, we can, and we have often on lectures, conferences, and other events here in California. So we're very fortunate to have a person such as Maggie in our community and to have institutions like the Ararat Eskidjo Museum. So thank you to Maggie and to the museum for all the great work you're doing. Some of you perhaps will remember that just over a year ago at UCLA, Nasser and the Armenian Film Foundation inaugurated what we call the J. Michael Hagopian Film Discovery Series. And I would be very derelict in my duties if I did not point out that the second such event will be held tomorrow at UCLA at 2 p.m. and there are flyers there in the foyer, and it will feature Michael Hagopian's film, Mandate for Armenia. Last year's event paired footage shot by Michael Hagopian on a Nasser trip to Western Armenia in 1967 with portions of Ani Hovanesian's work in progress on Western Armenia, portions of which we will be seeing this evening as well, and which centers on Stephen Sim and his many years of exploration and documentation of the vanishing legacy of Western Armenians. Stephen first came to my attention many years ago now, actually, as the mind behind the fantastic resource, online resource, Virtual Ani. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with that site, and if you are not, I would very much urge you to visit it. It's an endless source of information and documentation, not just on Ani, that's Ani the place, not Ani our filmmaker tonight, and its environs. It's a spectacular work. I first met Steve Sim almost exactly 11 years ago, we were just discussing, when he participated in a program at Nasser in Boston on the monuments of the Nakhichevan region. And he discussed and showed footage of his then recent adventures in Azeri Nakhichevan, where all traces of Armenian existence have been erased. So we have a potent combination here. We have Ani Hovhanessian and her skill as a producer and documentarian, and we have Stephen's knowledge of the landscape of Western Armenia and his courage and stamina over the years. And I should mention that Ani has picked up a few things about Armenian history through the years, I think, as well. I don't know how or where exactly, but I must point out that the film we're seeing tonight is a special version of this presentation that Ani has done just for this evening, and it is not for broadcast presentation, and it is not to be recorded in any way, shape, or form, please. Is there anything else I need to mention in that respect? Any other? Yes, your phones, please. Please turn off your cell phones so that they aren't ringing, buzzing, or making other strange sounds during the evening. So, that's all I would like to say. We're very fortunate to have the opportunity to watch this amazing footage and to hear after the film from both Ani and from Stephen Sim. A rare occasion indeed, especially to hear from Stephen. So sit back and enjoy it. Thanks for being here. Ready?
The soil is full of bone fragments. Another fragment of a skull. They're everywhere. So hip. Probably nobody knows what was here because it's so totally destroyed. I see it. A huge structure like this doing here in the middle of nowhere. Most of the world has been explored, but in this remote corner of Turkey I stumbled across something almost unexplored, and the place where every stone is important. I was warned against coming and warned to not be interested in Armenian things. For anybody who was connected with studying things in Turkey, the Armenian past of Turkey was a forbidden past. But there are lots of pasts which are not acceptable or presentable in modern Turkey. Greek past, Kurdish past, Assyrian past. Of all the pasts that are taboo in Turkey, the most unacceptable is the Armenian past. A lot of the sites I like were sort of the leftovers of a murder scene, and you're like a investigator finding traces and trying to figure out what happened. This seems to be a secret chamber. Not maps, no map. We are the ones who have found the real treasure, this hidden building, this hidden chapel. A very large area of present-day Turkey historically is not Turkish territory. The major monuments are belonging to another culture, a culture which Turkey refuses to recognize, and a history which Turkey officially refuses to recognize. So, beneath the modern lines of a modern map of Turkey, there are so many hidden maps. So somewhere hidden in this is historical Armenia. And the more you travel through Turkey, the more you recognize the secret hidden map. Back in 1984, I was studying architecture in Scotland, and it's a tradition amongst architectural students to go on a sort of grand tour during the summertime. So my choice was to come to Turkey. I've been coming to Turkey for almost every year for the past 30 years, spending up to 3 months traveling in eastern Turkey, mostly in the area that was historical Armenia, mostly up mountains or down valleys, exploring and discovering anything of Armenian origin that I can find. Over that long time, I've become aware of a hidden map underneath the map of Turkey that currently exists. The Turkish state has deliberately removed and changed the old names. So almost every village in eastern Turkey has an old name and a new name. And that hidden map shows places and borders and historical events and towns and cities and villages which don't appear on the regular map. And sort of, you can picture that map as underneath the regular modern map.
There's Minas, there's Setrak, there's Hisenikti, Ein Zankin. I can't make it out. But it's here as well. And this is what's left of this 12th century monastery, right outside of Carthage. Complete destruction of the Armenian homeland. That's our goal today. We don't know how much longer this will last. These are old Armenian homes and buildings that are now being renovated, but without any sort of acknowledgement of to whom they used to belong and by whom they were built. What's your name? Stephen. And what brings you here?
I just was traveling in Turkey and I came across a lot of interesting things which are being neglected and unrecorded and being destroyed. Some people wouldn't take interest in it's just lost forever. I tell you what, there's some buildings near here once sold. Everything has been destroyed. But this is an original house. All these houses were Armenian houses. There it goes. One brick at a time, they're demolishing, one block at a time. This is not a restoration, it is destruction, it is vandalism. Any of the country, you're going to prison for what you're doing. Okay, that's it. It's not like maliciously demolish an historic building in Britain, they would be prosecuted for doing it.
Why do you care so much?
Because I've been traveling all over. I might have more of a sense of the much broader destruction. It's not just the people, but it's the history of places, thousands of years of human activities in places, and the physical beauty of individual structures like this. This land was empty of anybody having any interest in it, and I just happened to stumble across this empty land and decided to make it my own.
Armenians have lived here for how long?
Armenia and Armenian culture was born in what's now eastern Turkey, and for thousands of years Armenians thrived here and towards the end tried to survive here until 1915.
I'm looking for Ermeni. No?
Ermeni buradan geçecek, göç edecek.
Türk. Ermeni? Ermeni yok. Ermeni? Hiç yok. Ermeni evleri. Bakma. Ermeni? Ermeni. Ermeni. Bu can Ermenilerin
sanat varmış. The original people are Armenians here, and we have a vote, we are Kurds. They say we are not the citizens originally.
Yeah. What happened to the original citizens?
I don't know.
I am Armenian. My grandparents are from Erzurum, Karabakh. Yeah. Where did the Armenians go?
I don't know. You know better than me.
Thank you. What is this?
Meryem Ana Kilisesi.
Kilise.
Evet.
Ermeni.
Ermeni. Evleri, orijinal Ermeni evleri.
No Armenians left?
Ermeni, yok. Ermeni yok burada.
Does he know who lived here before, maybe 100 years ago?
Ceyhan Efendi. Ceyhan Efendi Osmanlı döneminde bir milletvekiliymiş.
He was Armenian.
Öyle diyorlar, evet.
How long have these vineyards been here?
1000 sene. Bu bağlar Ermeni bağıyız. Doğru söylemek budur. Yani 2 günde olacağız. Anlıyorsun? Bütün Ermeni bağıyız. Böyle tut git.
What happened to the Armenian people in 1915 and the years after that? There isn't any question that it's a proper genocide. The Ottoman Empire tried to exterminate its Armenian population, and it was successful in doing that. There are no living genocide survivors around anymore, but these buildings that also experienced the genocide and are experiencing it to this day, they are genocide survivors, and that they should be respected for that reason. Probably the destruction that's happened to Armenian monuments is greater than the destruction that's happened to any other culture's monuments. There were thousands of Armenian populated towns and villages and cities and communities. Now they are gone. But inside historical Armenia, there's still a lot of traces of the thousands of years that Armenians lived there, despite the attempts of Turkey to eliminate that evidence. The evidence is the land itself, I think. It's almost as if the land has a memory. This is the valley of the Ligor River in eastern Turkey. We're about 10 miles from the Armenian border in that direction. And in the opposite direction, there's an Armenian monastery. I first walked along this trail in 1984. I came here to visit an Armenian monastery, which I knew was in the valley. The monastery was called Kirtkon, and there were 5 churches there from the 11th century. And they were all in very good condition, very beautiful, built with perfectly cut stone. But when I got to the monastery, I discovered that there was only one church there, and it was very badly damaged with huge gashes in the side. The realization that something had happened to these churches made me want to discover more about the history of these lands. It's like reassembling a large jigsaw puzzle, and each year I might find and understand a little bit of the puzzle and put it in place. And the more damage that is occurring to Armenian buildings in Turkey, the more I want to try and document what remains. For some places I'm visiting, it is a bit like going on a secret mission to a forbidden, unknown place. What I have would be a camera, a hat, some sunscreen, which must be... Everything here is Armenian. There are very few medieval monuments which are not Armenian. By using Google Earth, you can find out how to visit the places that are recorded, and by doing a lot of intensive looking, you can find places which are unknown. What's this? It seems to be casting a shadow, and it's roofless, and it's got strong outline of walls, so it's something of some size and substance, and also significantly it's facing east-west, so I suspected that might have been a church. So it's lost in the landscape, and the only way to find it is to look in that landscape. When I'm traveling through a countryside, I don't take a model map anymore, because in my head I'm seeing borders which are not marked on that map, monuments which are not marked on that map, old roadways and histories and towns and villages which are not marked on that map. I don't know which year I came here and looked up on the hillside and thought, those stones look a little bit strange, a little bit unnatural in the arrangement. So I walked up the hillside and found what was left of an Armenian cemetery. The stones are scattered here and there. Oh dear. A monster hole dug by treasure hunters. And there's a stone with an inscription dated 1895. If I didn't climb up there today, it's possible that stone would have disappeared. Nobody would have recorded its existence, and maybe the inscription might reveal a hidden part of the history of Bush. So, yeah, I think that's worth it. On the road to the village of Bazmashan in the region of Ararat, where the families of my grandfather Kaspar, Kirk Kukoyan, Tadeusz Giragosyan, and so many more were from. They've changed the name from Bazmashan to Sari Chubuk. They're completely widescreen. Stores in a line for probably another one, and the entire plan of Bazmashan is still hidden underneath the earth. Basi Bazmashan Urban Alphamachika Eshmaga
Biz Bazmashan tarafı Hazar-ı Haliyeti Bazmashan Kaspazı Lektorlere Hazar Halil Maksimumcu Kim tayreleri buldu onun hayatına gerçek takip çıkarmayacak. Gerek adiliyeti, gerek atlıbot. Sortaganların ve ilgili simhane. Umut. Yeter, Nistan kagızar kadını, ve kanarikan, havakit tabotçi, jamrayda tabotçiler. Tahtiyenin bunun sanatçın. Bazmasını, yıksın farklı. In the summer of 1915, the Armenians began to walk. They followed the gendarmes southward in the direction of Malatya and the river Euphrates. For a brief moment, the Armenians were allowed to stop by the village fountain, where Bazmashan's singing women once had filled their red jugs. This is in a hole at the edge of Old Bazmashan. Maybe this is part of a red jug.
that they used.
The vengeance that they wrote about.
Wow.
You just read about it.
Strong post-makeup cover. Hanidan Elias, Yedek Dava Perçat ve Şadan Sapacak Uzanlık Isparnayı Olduzba, Türkiye'de Bostikan dedi. Bostikan vermedi. Canavar Yedek Yılma bir vazı sos, bir beşler las, yedi las Isparnaylardan ağaçlar döneceğiz Isparnayı. Zorlanan devam ediyoruz Isparnayı, Kürtlerin Meydegaf. Buradan ne kısaftı. Also jak gadać stawać bez mas ciężko chyba najpierw tak do gardzielu z podatkiem jest działając jak faz prawie widać.
Często zeszła konferencja deszczowa, ładnie deszczowy, ładnie permanent. Taci, ładnie tam, pardon, proces produkcji, to United States. But when I came up for a vote to Bahrain, what was much more secret. They don't think that's true.
After the genocide, the Turkish government was busy confiscating property belonging to Armenians. They took churches, they took monasteries, they took fields, they took houses, they took villages, and those properties were redistributed to other bodies. This village is called Por. The new name is Dermanelti. The village was originally Armenian, and there was a monastery here that was founded in the 15th century.
Merhaba. They are the so-called owners of this?
They own it. How does the person own it?
Arasıyla Şii'nin birlikte, kısaca Rusya'daki birlikte onların çatıları devlet tarafından alınmıştır.
I see. Oh, when was that?
Yaklaşık 85 yıllarında.
It's an Armenian church, and it's called the Church of Saint Anania. That was built in the 6th century, survived to be used by Kurdish peasants as they settled in the village that the Armenians had once owned. But this is an unprotected site. It's not recognized as a historical monument, so people can do whatever they want with it.
Şöyle, hayvanatı, samanatı, bunları
There are probably a lot of secrets in this building, and you can just read them.
Sahip çıktık ve buraya ayağına bir daha çalıştık. Biz olmasaydık tabii çok
These are three Kafka's brave markers, memorial stones. In Turkey, very few left because people have destroyed them since the genocide. They'll destroy them just for vandalism or to remove the cross for religious reasons, or to get inside the stone because they think there might be hidden chambers containing gold.
And why would they think there's more gold around here?
Tabii ki bu kümeselin alanları kırılır. Zamanında bu şekil. Onların güzel bir yerine saklamışlar. Yani tek değil, mesela bütün yerlere sergileniyor. Mesela nereye koyduğu zaman orada sergildi zaten.
Altın var mı altın?
Yeah, gold. Gold. Anything Armenian, that's just all we think, gold.
I'm going to take a box to the old city, which is now uninhabited, and it's about 5 kilometres to the west of the current centre of the city.
I'm standing at the high point of the Rock of Van. I can see so many places that have been important to the Armenian nation since its birth. People have been looking over this view for thousands of years, and for most of that time we've been looking over and seeing a bustling walled city crammed full of buildings, churches, mosques, bazaars, shops, houses. But now we're looking over and we're seeing a ruin. And in April 1915, when we were looking over, we would be seeing a battlefield. With one side fighting for its survival, on the other side fighting partly because it was told to do so, and partly because of its lust to destroy. Probably nowhere else in the world has already so much been destroyed. What's left is so precious, it has to be properly preserved.
Who are you for these monuments?
I'm here to give those monuments a voice. We should just let the buildings speak for themselves. And the best way to do that is to leave them as they are, but conserve them. To make enough of a repair to stop them falling apart more, but keep them in their current ruined condition, because that's the closest we can get to what happened in 1915. Over the coming decades, any survivors were either assimilated or expelled. Today there's only a tiny number of Armenians living in Turkey, and almost none of them are living in historical Armenia. Some of them are hidden, they live secretly almost. Others are maybe half Armenian or quarter Armenian. They're descendants of people who converted to Islam.
Özgürlüğüne girmiş, kalanlardan sonradan hepsi Müslümanlaştırmış. Müslüman yerine orada yaşıyor. Zaten hemen ondan sonra Müslümanın yanı yaşama şansı yok. Hepsi Müslüman olmuşlar.
Babi, hayır. Nadim zargerin sinker dıkmar minasirin nadacı yağırır. Şarabı yağa Diyarbakır. Bozuk tıkırana git. Mami, babi, nekmiş biri haymanan. Saçı uçun, paravçusun, geçisun, paravçusun, paravçular.
Burası, babası, şartçılar paylaşan. Bunlar ayrı göz. Çok nasıl çıbatmasın. Ve bu genoside'da benim atalarımın da bilerek veya bilmeyerek payı var. Hem fiziki hem de kültürel soykırım. Tarihle artık yüzleşmeliyiz.
Historical Armenia and its borderlands. All the places I've been to have been empty of Armenians and have had no prospect of any returning and rebuilding the destroyed communities. But in Diyarbakir, and maybe to a lesser extent in Lush, there is now some small hopeful future that Armenians can continue to live and maybe even flourish in lands that until 1915 they lived and flourished in.
How has the church changed your life?
Çok şey değiştirdi hayatımı. Beni yani hayata bağladı. Sevdiğim için burada kilisede çalışıyorum. Yani ben oğlumu yaşama bakıyorum burada. Here, many people are coming, we don't know them, they don't know us, we begin to speak, and they begin to tell to that their families, they are Armenian. Maybe they are telling this first time in their life.
I was trying the Armenian identity 20 years ago. We have lost but we are together now. I'm feeling happy because I find myself.
Aşk anlamdan beri kazanır hayret.
past there are people re-emerging and reaffirming their Armenian identity and being proud to say that they're Armenian and being able to say publicly for the first time in generations that they are Armenian.
I am Armenian.
What I find here is encouraging for the future, but it's something that is different from what I've been doing. For me, it's the unwanted and deserted buildings of historical Armenia that are still awaiting saving. I'll continue to be there for these forgotten places. But as long as they exist, I'll give them the regard and the respect that they deserve. Armenia is not just 1915. Armenia is not just a genocide. It's about how you can't stop an entire culture and wipe it clean out of existence. There's always going to be something left. Sacred treasure. Bye for now.
Is closed. Shut down. We are Armenian, we are Christian. Twice
While I'm waiting, I just want to thank Annie for initiating this project and also for her bringing it to this advanced stage of near completion. Will it maybe never be exactly finished, but she's always adding a little bit more and taking little bits off. Also the other people involved in the project, Peter who did most of the filming, and Sharon who did a lot of the logistics and other things. and also Maggie for inviting me here today. Okay, it should be. No, there's nothing appearing. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the background to the places and the situation regarding Armenian monuments in Turkey. But firstly, there's a little bit in the film about the first place I visited in Turkey, the first Armenian place. Annie was asking about the background to that first visit. Hold on. In 1984, I was looking for somewhere interesting to travel to. Turkey was the sort of nearest faraway place to Britain, and it was also a reasonably inexpensive place to travel, so that's where I decided to go. However, it was very hard to find information about Turkey at that time. There was civil unrest in Turkey in the 1970s, late 70s, and in 1980 there was a military coup that put a stop to Turkey's fledgling economic growth and its tourism industry, and it also put a stop to guidebooks being published. So I couldn't find anything much about Turkey. I had no particular idea about visiting Eastern Turkey, but I was in a bookshop, and in the remainder of the books section I found a guidebook to Turkey. It was this book here. It's volume 2 of a 2-volume set, and it's Eastern Turkey. I never managed to find the Western Turkey section. This is it here. It was published in 1984, and it's a reprint and translation from the French original, which was published in, sorry, did I say 1984? I meant 1974, and it's a reprint of the French original from 1968. And in it, a lot of sites are described, Armenian sites, as I later was to find out, in particular this monastery of Kitskonk. And it's described there as if it's complete, and I think it was complete when the author went there, perhaps in the 1950s. So on the basis of this description, it will have a magnificent complex of 5 principal churches, and made of beautiful yellow stone, in the middle of a gorge, grouped together. On the strength of this description, I decided to go there. So I walked along from the nearest settlement is Digor, which is away back here, and I walked along the bottom of the gorge. I later discovered there was a path along the top, but I didn't know that in 1984, so I had to walk along the bottom and ford the river, or wade across the river several times. And after about 2 hours of walking, I saw this structure sticking up from the edge of the gorge. That's the first photograph I took. It was taken with infrared photography, black and white photography. And I climbed up this narrow wedge-shaped crevice, and at the top I found a single church, very beautiful but also very badly damaged. And of the other churches, I couldn't see anything. Although I looked around and I climbed further up the valley and walked higher up the cliffs. And it was only gradually that it dawned on me that the other 4 churches no longer existed. It took a while to actually discover that on the site. That's what it looked like originally. And that's what it was like in 1984. And the original description, these photographs are from pre-1915, and the description in the French book is exactly like those original photographs. This is one of the churches at Kutskong, and that's the same church today. So after walking around the site for a while, I began to realize, all the other churches have been destroyed. And it was the questions that arose from that fact, why were they destroyed and when were they destroyed, that initiated my interest in exploring the built remains of Armenian culture in Turkey. A lot of the Armenian churches in Turkey were destroyed during the First World War, and that sort of damage is perhaps understandable. This is the church in Trebizond, and this was one in Erzincan. But the scale of the destruction got a lot worse after the First World War. There aren't a great many documentary records or evidence to prove this. This is a French newspaper report from 1922. It's a little bit blurry, low resolution, so I'll read out what it says. Wait a moment until I start up the... Apologies. Yeah, the headline is destruction. I'll translate it also into English, so it's in French. It's from 1922, and the headline is Destruction of Armenian Monuments. And the article goes on to say that the Kemalist government in Ankara is attempting to erase everything that is not Turkish, including ancient monuments that constitute magnificent treasures of art that are part of the cultural heritage of the whole world. And it goes on to say that the scale of this destruction is worse than anything committed by the tyrants like Genghis Khan or Tamerlane. It mentions the destruction of Armenian cemeteries in Cilicia. It says that the destruction of the museum at Ani is known for certain, and that there are unverified reports that came via Tbilisi that is saying that the Turks are destroying Armenian monasteries in Lake Van, including Varag, Kutuz, Lim, and Akhtamar. And it concludes by saying that the Turks are attempting to erase everything that recalls the existence of Armenia. There's some additional evidence to back that claim up. In the 1930s, a Turkish general named Kazim Karabekir wrote his autobiography. He was in Eastern Turkey in 1920 and 21, and he says that in 1921 he was issued with a command from the Turkish Assembly to destroy the ruins of Ani. The wording of the command was, the relics and the traces of the monuments of Ani must be wiped off the face of the earth. And it added that you will be rendering a great service to Turkey when you accomplish this goal. Karabekir responded to the command by writing back that his soldiers were busy with military things and that anyway Ani was too big to destroy. But certainly some parts of Ani were destroyed. This is a khachkar from the 12th century. It was one of the Catholicos of Armenia was buried there. But it's sort of anti-Catholicos, because by that time there were two different sites where the Armenian church was operating from. One was in Cilicia and then another rival one in Ani. and this was the tombstone of one of the Anni Catholici. And for my early visits to Annie, I couldn't find the stone anywhere or any fragments of it, but just by chance, walking along, and I noticed a piece of it sticking up out of the earth, and that's it there. The stone itself has now gone completely. I don't know what happened to it. Perhaps somebody stole it. Other evidence of the destruction at Annie is from the museum. It's quite well known what happened there. Just as the Turks were arriving, the Armenians came and managed to rescue a lot of the contents of the museum. But what's not quite so well known is that there were two museums at Annie, and it was only the contents of the first museum, the one that was housed inside the former mosque, that was rescued. The other museum was located in this building here, and it was left behind, and it was entirely destroyed. Kalantar, the archaeologist, the Armenian archaeologist who was responsible for evacuating the remains from the mosque museum, came back in 1920 and photographed the ruins of the stonework museum. The other museum housed fragments of stone carvings, and so it's not called the Stoneworks Museum. That's the museum today. There's just a small fragment of the walls left, and inside you can still see some of the former museum exhibits. In my early visit to Annie in the 1980s, the entire earth around and inside this building was thick with stone carvings, but they all disappeared in the 1990s. Unfortunately, photography was forbidden at Annie until the late 90s, and I was never able to photograph any of them. Other evidence of the Turkish policy of destroying Armenian buildings is in this book. It's a French book from 1944, and it describes an official visit by a Frenchman to eastern Turkey. He was sent by the French government to investigate the possibilities of the French army buying wool supplies from Turkey. So the early evidence that the Second World War was coming. So he was there in early 1939, and he wrote the book in 1944, and there was an English version of it published in 1948. He was probably the first Westerner to travel through Turkish Armenia since the genocide. This was Van, and the devastation still looks very fresh. So that's a photograph from 1939, and he went towards the Iranian border, and he came across an Armenian monastery. It's Sur Bartholomeos, and it was part of the compound of an army base, and he talks with the commandant of the army base, who is complaining that he's not been given enough dynamite to destroy the church, that he'd done his best work using grenades, but it wasn't enough. This church was probably destroyed in the 1940s, perhaps because they finally got a lot of post-war supplies of high explosives cheaply, and that's the building today. And it's little more than a shell now, and that's the inside. Other evidence of what has happened to buildings is not documented at all. This is a famous church at Bagaran. It dated from the 7th century, and it was unique for Armenian churches, and it had 4 freestanding columns inside. This is a survey done by Toros Toramanian before the genocide, and it disappeared sometime in the 1950s. So if you go to Bagaran today, that's the village, and you can see on the castle site there's a 19th century church still there, and on the Armenian site there's a little medieval chapel, but of the big church nothing is left. When I was looking around the site, I came across this abandoned army post. It was built in the 1950s, For a little bit, I was very cautious about approaching it because I didn't know it was still abandoned. But when I got up close to it and began looking at the walls, I discovered that they were full of fragments of stone bearing Armenian inscriptions. So the church was demolished and its stone was used to build this army post. Other things that were destroyed were smaller objects. This is from the Ani Museum. It's one of the things that Kalantar wasn't able to evacuate from the site. It's the famous statue of King Gagik. Armenian accounts are silent about what happened to this statue after the First World War, but there's a Turkish account by a man from Kars named Kızıroğlu. He was born in Kars in 1918, and he writes later in his autobiography that in 1930 the statue was standing in the schoolyard of his school. It had been taken from the village of Ani to Kars, and the authorities in Kars were going to deliver it to the new museum that Ataturk had established in Ankara. Ataturk had given out an order to all the regions of Turkey that they should provide exhibits for this new museum. And so people in Kars didn't really have much to give, but they decided to send this statue. And it was put on the railway car and sent to Erzurum, and no further information is known about what happened to it. It never arrived at Ankara. Then in the 1990s, this fragment of carving arrived in the Erzurum Museum. It was some locals who found it buried in the earth, and they just drove up in a car and left it behind. So exactly the spot that it was found in is not known. But if you go back, it's the sleeve section, part of the lower part of his beard of the Gagik statue. So what appears to have happened is the statue arrived in Erzurum safely, and then it was going to be loaded onto a truck to be taken to Ankara, but somebody decided that the museum shouldn't contain this Armenian thing, and instead it was destroyed and buried, its fragments buried. And even to this day, you don't see Armenian things in Turkish museums. If you want to see Armenian things in a Turkish museum, what you do is you go around the back of the museum, if there's museum grounds, and generally all the Armenian things are hidden away at the back, outside the building. This is the Van Museum, and there's rows of Armenian objects, tombstones and dedications from buildings. This is because they were not allowed to go inside the main museum. The Van Museum has changed its location recently, so I'll be interested to know what's happened to these things, whether the political situation has changed enough for them to go inside the museum, or whether it's got worse and they just have destroyed them and got rid of them. The denial or destruction of Armenian things also goes on at an academic level. This shot was in Annie's film. It's the place is Edremit. And in 1972, a Turkish archaeologist named Oktay Beli wrote this article about the Edremit site. Oktay Beli is quite a famous person now, a very senior figure in Turkish archaeology, and he's quoted in lots of academic journals in the West. This is him starting his career in 72, and of the Edremit site, he writes that it's an Aratian city and a stoneworking site. And that's his photographs of the site, which are not dissimilar to the condition of the place today. And he produced a plan of the site. And particularly note the bits I've highlighted in yellow. this section up here. I'll show you a photograph of it. Actually, his stoneworking site is an Armenian graveyard, an Armenian cemetery, and this is the tomb. This is the slot for the Kachkar, and this is a slab covering the grave. There's another Kachkar base here, and there's another one over here. But if you go back to his plan, the Kachkar base that's here is omitted, and the Kachkar base here is not shown. It's just shown as a plain stone. And other parts of his site plan have been altered so as to not show the reality of the site. So it's a deliberate falsification. The site has rows of Kachkar bases that run all the way up here, and there's actually 3 rows, 1 row, 2 row, and 3 rows. But on Oktay Beyli's plan, the rows are omitted, and only these 3 ones are shown. And other stones are shown in the opposite direction of reality. So that's the row here. 1 stone, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's 1 row, and then there's another row with 1 stone and 2 stones and several more out of the picture. So it's not possible that this is an artificial mistake. It's a genuine, fraudulent archaeological report. Another indication of how Turkish academics are scared of Iraqi scared of Armenian sites is this place is called Altıntepe. It's in the Erzincan Valley, and it was excavated in the 1960s. But there was one corner of the site that didn't excavate. When I was there in the 90s, I discovered a stone, a lintel bearing a cross on it, and there was no indication about where this came from. So I think what happened is the Turkish archaeologists uncovered this stone with a cross on it, realized there was a church on that site, and just decided to leave that area unexcavated. And sure enough, in the 2010s, it was re-excavated by another team of Turkish archaeologists who were a bit more courageous than the first lot, and they excavated the unexcavated part, and they did discover the ruins of a church. This is probably the earliest church in Armenia. St. Gregory, the illuminator, came to Erzincan and he founded the first church there, and it might be this very same foundation. The Turkish denial of Armenian things also goes down to quite trivial levels, like the signposts to tourist sites. For Ani, you get a lot of information, but you never see the word Armenia mentioned once in the notice boards. And in other sites, exactly the same. This is a church in Palu. It's an Armenian church from the 19th century. But according to the Tourist Information Board, it's a Byzantine church built in some unspecified 1,000-year period. And sometimes there are ridiculous levels of denial. This is the signpost to Ani, and somebody's taken a disliking to the correct spelling of Ani, which is a dotted I. There are 2 different I's in Turkey, and a dotted I and an undotted I in the Turkish alphabet, and they're pronounced slightly differently. So we would pronounce Ani, but the Turks want to change that pronunciation and change it to Ani. And Ani is an undotted I. So somebody has gone round with a little bit of sticky covering and wiped out the I, the dot of the I, to turn it into Ani. And this is another example of Turkish trivial obsession with Armenian things. This is a pilgrimage that took place at Ani in 2001 to mark the anniversary of Armenians accepting Christianity as a state. I was at Ani a few days before this visit, and I was able to take photographs without any problem. But on the day of the visit, all photography was banned at Ani. And this ban, so that the Turks could pretend that it was nothing really to do with these Armenians coming, the ban continued for another year. And it was only with difficulty that the Turkish press got permission to take a photograph of the pilgrims in front of the cathedral, and I was able to take the picture as well. As well as the sort of trivial level of continuing Turkish obsession with denying Armenian things, there's a more recent development which superficially you'd think was a good thing. It's connected to Turkish-Armenian reconciliation, and in connection with that, a number of buildings have been so supposedly restored. This is in 2007. This is Akdamar Island, and the church was closed for several years and repaired, and this is the official reopening. It's covered in Turkish flags with a picture of Ataturk, and the Turkish Prime Minister's there, as well as several representatives from the Armenian state, and the Armenian Patriarch was there as well. However, if you dig and think a little bit more about what's happening here, this isn't a good thing. We've got the restoration itself destroyed a lot of the original features. The gavit in front was originally flat roofed and had a grass roof on top of it, and the church replaced it with a gable. But the main problem is that Akdamar has been turned into an archaeological site. It's been changed from an archaeological site into a museum. There's a term for this. It's called musealization. It means the removal of an object from the creators of that object and its transportation into a curated environment, a controlled and curated environment. There's nothing in principle wrong with that, but if the curator is Turkey, then Turkey controls what is said about this building and what takes place in this building. So the Turks make various propaganda events connected to this building. The opening was a propaganda event, and each year they allow one visit by Armenian priests to the site to conduct a ceremony. There was one a couple of months ago. But before the conversion into a museum, you could go to Akdamar at any time and have your own religious service if you wanted. I was there on lots of occasions with Armin Ararat's tours, and we quite often had little ceremonies, religious ceremonies inside the church. I was also there with Armenians from Iran, and again, there was singing inside the church, and there was a little religious ceremony. But all that has stopped now that it has become a museum. And the Turks also restore it according to their tastes. That's what was left of the monastery that was attached to the church. But this condition is not pleasing to Turkey's eyes, so they just demolished all this and rebuilt it out of new stone that they imported into the island from somewhere on the mainland. And the denial of Armenia even goes deeper than that. This is a map from the 1780s. It's one of the first modern maps that shows Turkey in a correct geographical detail. In the western part, you've got this area is called Anatolia, and over here it's called Armenia. And this correct labeling continued into the 1920s. This is a 1922 map. Again, in the west, you've got Anatolia, and over here, you've got Armenia. And this map actually shows the proposed western border of the Armenian Republic. However, in 1941, Turkey held a congress, a geographical congress, and the internal borders of Turkey were relabeled, and the eastern section was called the Eastern Anatolia Zone. Prior to this, Anatolia was just the central section. So this Eastern Anatolia is an invented name, and if you superimpose it on top of that 22 map, you can see that what is Armenia? Eastern Anatolia comprises almost all of what was historical Armenia. This would be, you'd think, would not be taken up by Western academics. Unfortunately, it has been, and it's now a universal term to refer to historical Armenia as Eastern Anatolia. And of course, Eastern Anatolia can't end at this 1922 border with Armenia. So nowadays, all of Armenia is called Anatolia in academic literature. Here are two examples of that were published last year. This book by Anthony Eastman is called Tamta's World. Tamta was an Armenian princess who was passed around various rulers in historical Armenia. She became the wife of various local rulers, including the Muslim rulers of Akhlat. And Eastman, throughout the book, doesn't refer to the land as Armenia, and he calls it Anatolia, Eastern Anatolia. Even worse is this book, again published last year. They've got a picture of Van, and it's called Medieval Anatolia. I'll give the author of it, surprisingly, is actually Armenian, and she gives a very curious explanation about why she thinks the word Anatolia is appropriate. I'll just read it out. So I've got a computer that keeps going into sleep mode. Yes, Anthony Eastman, and the author of Tamta's World, he's written lots of books about the monuments and culture of Eastern Turkey. And he says that he's not going to use the word Armenia because it's just traditionally labelled as Armenia. And for the architecture and landscape book, in the introduction, we have the following quote: "Today, the term Anatolia is most commonly used to describe mainland Turkey from the Aegean to the eastern borders with Armenia and Georgia. During the late medieval period, the regions that constituted what is today considered Anatolia were defined in different languages and cultural contexts by a range of terms." And she goes on to write, "We embrace the term Anatolia as a representation of an amalgam of spaces that share a geohistory in the medieval period. And we use the term because it lacks clarity and consistency." Now, the idea that the word Armenia is just a cultural concept is to deny the reality of Armenia. And to call it Anatolia links it to regions which have no connection with Armenia. Anatolia stretches all the way to the Aegean. It also denies the connection that Armenia has had historically with Iran. And I see this as a continuation of the Armenian genocide. In fact, maybe it's the final part of that denial, when the question is solved and it's sent to the museum. So because of things like this, that I've tended to ignore working with people and decided to do my own thing all the time. So regardless of what people call historical Armenia or Turkish Armenia or Anatolia, Eastern Anatolia, I'll continue to travel there and acknowledge the correct identity of the monuments that I find. This is a grave at Muradye, or Berkri is the Armenian name. That's another Kashgar on Mount Nemrut, near Tatvan. It's Akhtamar Island. And that's me sitting on top of the minaret at Ani. And finally, just to prove that I go there in the winter as well, that's again the same gravestone at Moradie in summertime and in winter time. So thank you for listening. I'd like to also apologise a little bit for the crudeness of the PowerPoint. I had one preserved and put together before I left Scotland, and then I realised I'd left it behind on my computer when I was halfway across the Atlantic.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Annie.
Hello. Hello, hello.
Well, thank you, Steve. Can you hear me? Yes? I'll speak without a microphone as we wait for a microphone. So, Steve seems quite tame, maybe, but he is the greatest lion I have ever met, traveling through our lands that I longed to go to because of my grandparents and because of your grandparents and parents who gave us that. It lived in me for so many years, and as much as I couldn't bear to meet those lands and those soils where they lived and created and died, I had to go. Because as the years go by, we have good lives here. And it's easy to remember Charpert and Erzurum and Mush and Van and Gars and Gaiseri and all these thousands of villages that we know that our people came from. It's easy to remember the names, but it's also easy to get lost in our lives here and to lose that connection. And it becomes almost a figment of your imagination, and it almost becomes this source of pride, but what's in that pride and what's in that being? And it's not, I think, for me at least, until I returned to our lands, thanks to, again, that which our grandparents gave us, that which my parents gave us, and led by Armen. Thank you, Armen Aroyan. I took my first trip in 2012 with my father, Richard Hopanesian, and a group of journeyers, and I met Sharon, and Peter I've known all my life, and he came the next year. But what that does is that you see that these are real living places. These are not just names and words. These are places where, as you saw, there are the remnants, the relics, and even more important to me, I have to stand away from Steve because he may hurt me. The relics, the physical relics are obviously, they are the evidence of who and what we were and what we created and what remains, and it is, as Steve says, evidence of the genocide. It is the closest thing we have to that. But for me, the people matter too. And the stories that those two people tell, stories that they've heard, may be correct, maybe half, maybe full, but even more important to me is that I found our living connection there. We're part of a continuum, and our continuum is alive as long as we keep it alive. And you're here, which makes me very happy, so many familiar people, familiar meaning family and friends. And our connection is much deeper than that which we've created here. It's something that started long, long ago. And if we really sit down and look into it, we'll find that our grandparents and our parents and our families crossed paths in good days and in bad, in creating families and civilization and church and schools and life, their lives paths crossed as they did in death marches or in trying to save each other or help each other. So I'm glad that you're here today. I'm glad that we have each other and that we know we belong and that it's up to us to keep that continuum alive. I'm thankful to Armin and to all of my co-journeyers and Sharon and Peter who came along with me the third time. I'm grateful that in Kayseri I walked into a house and met Steve, and that moment I just happened to capture, and it was in this version of the film. And Steve is a very quiet, private person, and he doesn't like being around a lot of people, or hasn't been around a lot of people, and he likes to be invisible in Turkey so that he could do the great work that he does, so that he could go there for 35 years and not be kicked out. Though sometimes I thought he wanted to be kicked out because he'd start fighting with people 3 times his size who were saying there is no genocide, and we were up on the rock of Van, and one of them was going to throw the other off. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But he's not afraid, and as you see, he knows our history in details that we can't even begin to comprehend. So I thank you. It wasn't easy convincing him to let me travel with him and my co-travelers, Sharon and Peter. Peter ended up in the hospital. He probably doesn't want me to tell you that, for about a week with pancreatitis and mush. Sorry. So good old Dr. Sharon Chekijan took care of Peter. He recovered, we recovered, and we continued shooting throughout. And this is the result. This isn't the result. This is the non-broadcast version. I'm working on a broadcast version that hopefully you will see one day. So that was my very long introduction to our Q&A. So if you have questions for Steve or for me, we're happy to answer. Yes. What do you do when you're not in Eastern Armenia?
Think about going there, maybe. Or plan to go there, or reassessing what I've just done when I was there before. It does take up quite a lot of my, well, not my time, but thoughts. And I don't really have a great many other outside interests beyond the historical Armenia.
In order for a monument to be preserved, it has to be UNESCO designated, and what would make that happen so they wouldn't be destroyed?
No. UNESCO is nothing to do with preservation. UNESCO is a political organization, it's a political club. So UNESCO has protected Ani, supposedly. But in reality, Ani is being destroyed. The buildings at Ani are being over-restored, rebuilt to almost look like new structures. All the supposed restrictions and amenities that an archaeological site is supposed to have according to UNESCO, like proper sewage, disposal of rubbish, that doesn't happen at Ani. So it's not a real protection or preservation, it's just a political propaganda, really. And I'm very against everything that's happening to Armenian architecture in Turkey. That it's being destroyed by treasure hunters or by Muslim fanatics or by state bodies or by private individuals, or also the over-restorations that are taking place in many Armenian buildings. It's not a real restoration, it's a destruction by restoration, and it destroys the historical value of the buildings.
So an entity that protects those, all over the world, like the Buddha in Afghanistan, for example, what makes an entity strong enough to preserve a monument?
I don't think you can just start something like that the condition of Armenian monuments in Turkey has gone on for so long, the neglect, that it's now, I think, too far gone to correct. Western archaeologists and Western historians should have been correcting Turkey in the 1920s and 30s about what it was doing to the monuments and what it was saying about the genocide, but they didn't. And even in the 1990s, when I was in Ankara, I used to pop into the British Institute there, and they have a cupboard, they called it the Banned Books cupboard, and in it was anything to do with Armenia. We have Lynch's 1890s book about Armenia, and we've got Tom Sinclair's 1980s guidebook to Eastern Turkey, and again that was banned, so it was in the cupboard because it mentions Armenian things.
Yes, oh yes.
I'm Martin Speech, and I'm the chairman of the Ararat Museum. And my dad, he's a genocide survivor, and his vision was to build a museum down below in the church here. And those two angels you see on the side of the side there, those were taken from a picture he saw in the church in Altamar. And he always wanted to go there, and never was able to do it. My mom's son was from Vaughan, and it's very touching. And Armin, that you're here, we live with Armin, and that's how we saw a lot of what you showed. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ani, bringing it alive and showing things we never would have seen. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, okay.
Sorry, back row, left side. Yeah, hi.
Steve, I've read every page of your website, virtualmind.org. And after speaking with you today and listening to you tonight, I realized that your website represents maybe 1% of what you know about historic Armenia. What are you going to do with all your research? How are you going to share it? What will happen to it after you're gone?
I don't intend to go quite so soon. Yeah, Virtual Annie has got quite a lot of content on it. I started it in 1990, and at the time NATO was bombing Serbia, and the Serbian churches in Kosovo were being destroyed, and it seemed like an apt time to start to document using the internet the condition of Armenian structures in Turkey. So I probably did a lot of work in the early years, and I've kind of tailed off in the later years, mostly because each article, each page, web page has been taking longer and longer to write because I wanted it to be more and more professional in its language and its presentation. I mean, ideally there should be a page on every structure in Turkey, every Armenian structure, and perhaps pages on quite a few Muslim ones as well, since they have Armenian architects, or the architecture is heavily influenced by Armenia. It's just the time to do it, and the effort to do it, and the funding to do it, yes. I mean, if somebody wants to sponsor me per page, I would certainly consider it, even if they have favorites. I have probably several hundred sites which have got enough photographs and information about to produce several hundred more pages. Virtual Annie started just to document the site at Annie, but I realised I couldn't consider the buildings at Annie in isolation, so then I expanded it to in the vicinity of Annie, and then it was expanded to include any Armenian-related structures in Turkey, and it even includes some in Armenia and Iran as well.
So can I just follow up? Will you take a more active role in publicizing? Like the website will never mention your name, and this film is, I think, your first.
Well, it doesn't. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't mention my name, but it's not a big secret. You just look up who owns the domain name, and it's really probably. I'm not sure exactly why I haven't put my name on it. Perhaps because I don't want it to be identified as the creation of a single person, because then you start that person starts to get labels attached to them, So some people might think I'm Armenian when they look at the website, which I'm not, or they might think I'm Turkish because there was a Turkish version originally also, or it's easier for it to be readable if there's no person attached to the text, I think. Unless I was somebody who was an non-academic, because I'm not that, again, it's probably better not to have a name written at the bottom of every article, every web page.
Were you aware of the history of the Armenian people before 84 as far as the genocide?
It was probably gradual. Like I said, there were no real books available, so my knowledge of Turkish Armenia came from books that were written when Turkish Armenia actually existed. They're from 19th century travel books. The knowledge of the genocide is later than these books were, so that was maybe more immersed later. At least the exact knowledge of it, I was always aware that something had happened, but the quantity, the number of victims, and where it occurred, and when and why it had occurred, that was more immersed more gradually. But I never met any Armenians until I think it was 1998 when I came and joined one of Armin's tours. Before that, I hadn't met any Armenians either in Britain or in travelling around in Turkey.
Yes. I think people are afraid to say what's on their mind because they could be harmed. They could go to prison. They could be hurt. I think a lot of people don't know. I think a lot of people do know. And I also think that some of the people who I asked actually have Armenian blood in them. I think that man who said, "You know better than I think he's Armenian." And
he was also not. He was saying that, you see by the expression on his face.
Right.
He was not. He knew what happened. He didn't want those words recorded.
It's dangerous to say it
on video.
Surprisingly, though, what you've seen is maybe 1/100th of what I shot, and there are maybe 50 hours of interviews in Turkish that need to be translated still. And I have to say that, especially in Mush and in Dikranagerd, we came across so many people, thanks to the church Surkiragos in Dikranagerd, which is now painfully closed, but because of that being a place where people could congregate and open up. I met so many people who said that their grandparents were Armenian, their grandmother was Armenian, or great-grandmother was Armenian, or that guy who showed me that church in Mush where I say, "What is this?" and he says it's an Armenian church. His grandmother was Armenian, and her name, he says, was Hache, and he showed the sign of the cross. And when she was dying, she said, "We're Armenian." So many people gave stories of their Armenian roots, and that's what really penetrates me, because I feel like there is something living there, and there are people, there is a connection, and what we do with that, I don't know. And it's very painful, and I'm still in touch with these people. In fact, I want to read you, I just received a note from a girl from Dikranagerd telling me how things are and what she wants us to know. But there was a man in Dikranagerd who said, "My grandfather killed 14 Armenians. He was a Kurd. And he said, my grandmother said, you killed one more and I'm leaving you." So there are people also who are as Kurds, even though they were horrible to us and killed us, now because their experience, a little bit of what they dished out to us, now we're best friends. And I actually have some compassion for them, and I feel something for them, and they too are repenting to a degree. So, yes.
Was that museum you went to, was it in Kars that had a lot of Armenian relics?
No, that was at Van. It was Van. It was the archaeological museum in the centre of Van. It got damaged in the earthquake that happened in Van in the what year was it? 2014, I think it was. And it was closed, but the grounds were still open until 2 years ago. And then a new museum is being established near the castle. And it was meant to be open this summer, but for some reason it was put back. So I don't know what's happened to all those stones. They're no longer on display, or not, they were never really on display. They were just hidden away at the back of the museum. And if you knew that it was there, or if you knew that that's where in Turkish museums you can find things, then you walk around the back. You can do the same thing in the Erzurum Museum. You can find Armenian things. And there's a museum in Karaman near Konya. Again, it's got Armenian gravestones hidden around the back. Quite a few places like that. Yeah, the gravestones shaped like sheep or rams or horses, and some of them have Armenian writing. When I was there the first time in the 1980s and 90s, these were being labelled as Turkish gravestones, even though there were Armenian writing on them. But that changed, I think, unless it's gone back, unless things have got worse, they're now admitting that these are Armenian gravestones. But if you go inside the museum, there's still a complete denial of anything Armenian. There's big wooden doors which came from an Armenian church, and it's labelled as being a Russian cathedral that they came from, despite the fact that it's got Armenian writing on it. And if you look very closely at it, you can see the signature of Arshak Fetvajian, who designed it. And also they've got display cases with 19th and 20th century cast iron icons. And there was the museums in Turkey, they go through periods. Sometimes they're honest and sometimes they're dishonest. And it was going through an honest period and they were labelled 19th century icons. And then it went into a dishonest period and they scratched out the one. So they're now 9th century cast iron icons because the Turkish propaganda wants to minimise the fact that cars was mostly Armenian in the 19th century. So that's why it was unacceptable to present these icons as 19th century Armenian icons.
Yes, Sharon?
Well, I went there in 1984, then I missed a year and it was 86, then I missed 2 years and it was 89. But every year after that I've been there. I'm going back because there's always something new to do, or there's incomplete things that I did in previous years, or I just like to revisit the same place multiple times because it's a nice place to visit. I'm not being overtly political. I'm not demanding that the restitution of property be given to the Armenian Church or that territory be given to the Republic of Armenia. In fact, I'm saying that such a thing would be, for the territory, would be just impossible, and for the property would just be counterproductive because the Armenian Church in Istanbul doesn't want these buildings. What's the point of returning them to the Armenian Church? So I'm not saying anything controversially political, and so in that sense, as long as my interest remains at a private level, I don't think I would be affected by Turkish restrictions, but one can never really tell. There was one archaeologist who was there in the 70s and the 60s, Jean-Michel Thierry. He was stopped going there by being arrested and then allowed to escape. So he was classed as a fugitive prisoner, and that was the reason why they would refuse him permission to return. So there are also ways that Turkey can stop people, but the main way they stop people is just they don't pay people who are going against the official line, and if you're with the official line, which is now the European Union's official line, that the Ottoman Empire was a sort of proto-EU, and it was a rather good thing if it weren't for these Armenians who persisted in surviving until 1915. Then, and the Armenian sites in Turkey are really multicultural sites. That's the current jargon word, multiculturalism. So as long as you go along with that message, then you get financing and you get grants and you get to join various NGOs and travel around the world appearing in conferences. Even in Yerevan, I was there in the summertime, and there was a group of Turks who came from Istanbul with their pre-assembled exhibition on Ani. It was all the restorations were good. The Turks never destroyed anything. Nothing is mentioned about what happened to the excavations, the Russian excavations, or what happened to the museum. All that's quietly forgotten about. So as long as you forget things, don't say things that might be controversial, then you can get quite a lucrative career out of Armenian studies if you go through various NGOs and do it that way.
Question to you. Who supports you for the mission that you have?
Nobody. I mean, Armin's been very helpful in taking me to lots of places, and I've also taken him to places that he would never have normally taken his tour groups to. And again, I mentioned the groups from Iran, Armenian groups from Iran, and occasionally some from Armenia and Russia. But most, 90% of what I've done has just been by myself, using my own savings.
Question to you, Andy. What would it take to bring your documentary on international level?
She asked what it would take to bring this documentary to the international level. I think to a mass audience, which is my hope, to make it broadcast worthy. It is maybe to some. But this is all essentially, except for what we did together when we traveled, this is all my doing. I have edited it and I have done everything that you see. However, I don't do graphics and I don't do audio correction and I don't do video correction and I don't do licensing and music and all these things that are necessary. Errors and omission insurance, publicity, distribution, all those things take money. I've never asked for it, and I should. So I invite there to be, if there are people who think that this is something that's valuable for audiences to see and would like to be a partner, I'd be very pleased. And I'll be able to take this to the next level and continue working on this and many other projects that I have lined up, and I think that tell our story really on a human and international level where it relates to everybody. So.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, first man, then there's a woman behind as well. Whoever wants to go first? Yeah, go first.
When you started Virtual Army early 1990,
yeah, I think 91, I think it was.
Yeah.
For every year Belgrade was being bombed.
Right, and then you started digitizing it, and we all know that at the entrance, the map, the old map, the blue map was lousy and full of lots of errors. As the Turks renovated the wall, they actually used your own map, and you were delighted. Can you express?
Yes, they did. They used quite a lot of the graphics from Virtual Ani have been reused in Turkish publications. Also, if you go to Varag Monastery in Van, on the inside, there's pinned up the pages from Virtual Ani. But the map has been used either unchanged or slightly changed, perhaps, in quite a lot of Turkish websites and books. I think it's in the guidebook to cars. It's also been used. Good for noticing that. Thanks. And the woman behind? Yeah. Yes, I think about 5 times. I was there this summer, and maybe 5 years ago, and then 7 years ago, and then once before that. So that's 4 times I think I've been there.
It's much more than all of that. It's who we are. When I first went, the first time I went, I was at the airport in New York, and a Turk started talking to me, and I had grown up not very happy about Turks, and he was kind of flirting with me, and I said to myself, go to hell, don't talk to me. And then when I got there to Turkey, I realized that in beautiful Istanbul that I don't exist. What am I angry about? They don't know who I am or what I'm feeling, and they're just living their lives. But then when I went eastward onto our lands, and I saw people who looked like they were the grandchildren of our killers, and I saw that in them, and I felt horrible things inside. But then I also went to the villages that were ours, and I saw the relics, and I saw the people, and I saw life continuing, and I heard the music, and I ate the food, and I imagined what it was, and I felt like I was home. I feel like I'm home when I'm there. And it keeps calling me. And if I could, I would be there all the time, because I feel like there's so much still waiting to be found and embraced, and so many stories yet to be told. And again, for me, that living connection is huge. I just want to read a sentence or two from what this girl wrote to me. She wrote, I just got this 3 or 4 days ago, and her name is Hangul, and she's from Dikranagir, and she says, Dear Ani, she says several things, but this is the part that I'm going to read. Dikranagir is suffering as usual. The pressures, prohibitions, poverty, and many other negative things. But we are always hopeful despite everything. I believe we will all be together one day. We want to see you here again. I hope you will come again and stay here for a very long time together. I'm waiting for your answer as soon as possible. Sirov Hangul. So when you read that, there is also still an element of hope, and there is also an element of obligation. So what I felt there is something that you will only feel when you go there, and I encourage you to do it. You'll know better who you are.
I don't think you can just go there and then expect to get the full experience out of it. I think you have to firstly do a little homework before you go, and also when you're there, try to keep your eyes open and don't behave like a tourist. Just try to think what it was like before the genocide. For example, a lot of the places I've gone to, I've tried to revisit the sites in the same manner as they would have been visited when they were active in use. So, for let's say in Van, near Van, there's a big mountain called Varak, and it was an important pilgrimage site. So today's tourists might just go to the individual sites, but originally you would walk from Van to the monastery at one side, Grigor, then you would walk to the top of the mountain where there was an upper monastery called Upper Varag, and then you would walk down to the other side of the mountain where there's a more famous monastery of Lower Varag, Varagavank, and then you would maybe stay the night there. Well, nowadays the roads are good enough for you to walk all the way back to Van, so you can do this in an entire day. So that's following a 19th century back into medieval times pilgrimage routes. Again, all the monasteries had the particular procession routes. There's a monastery near Moradie which has got a whole network of paths with pathways. They're now all abandoned, but you can follow them, and if you follow them, you can discover things which you wouldn't see if you were just going straight to the main church. There are, votive crosses carved on the road. There's cascars carved on the sides of cliffs, and there's strange things like there was a big pile of cascars which were never meant to be gravestones, but the stones slabs without the slots on them at the base, and I think pilgrims must have taken these up the mountain and left them there as votive gifts. But you discover things like that if you spend the time to visit each site and spend an entire day or multiple days, multiple visits over multiple years to the same site.
Yeah, you can't be a casual tourist.
That said, Armenian tours are really good and very pleasurable, and it's lovely to travel in the company of people. For the website, I used to analyse where everything was coming from, and quite a large percentage did come from Turkey. The largest was from America, but Turkey was quite large. Sorry, what was the rest? For other people, non-Armenians. Generally, for the history, they don't really know, and you also come across some people that the two sides to every story type of person who refuse to come down on one side or the other. They think they're being very liberal and open-minded by saying this, but actually they're just being a little bit like cowardice. I see it as. What I do sometimes ask is what they think about the actual physical experience of visiting the sites, what they think the sites should be like. And again, everybody I've asked, they do like the buildings to be unrestored and in the sort of natural ruined state, which is not what the Turkish state is doing to the buildings. But unfortunately, the vast majority of visitors to, let's say, Ani and to Akdamar, they're either Turkish or they're Iranians, Muslim Iranians who come from Iran. Most tourists to Eastern Turkey are Iranians, and the number of European or American visitors is very small, maybe 5%. So the Turks cater for the biggest market. And in Iran and in Turkey, they like their old buildings to look as if they're newly built.
Yes.
Yeah, that's you're referring to the houses in Kayseri. Unfortunately, those houses are fake. The entire interior is fake.
Are you talking about the ones that look grand or the ones that were being destroyed? Is that this right here?
Yeah.
That's it?
Yes.
Oh my.
That was mush.
I have a lot of footage. What you saw was one drop of what has been shot, and there's a lot of footage of homes in ruin, churches in ruin, villages in ruin, and a few standing churches. You saw one of them in that village of Pod, and a few others. Yes.
Yeah, the big houses in Kayseri that are at the beginning of
where we met.
Yeah, the buildings with which we met. The interiors are entirely new, I've got photographs and video material of the original building. It was left derelict for about 20 years, and each year it got more and more derelict, and more of it fell down. So when the Turks decided to restore it, what they did was they gutted the interiors and they demolished most of the upper structures and then rebuilt them, and then they did the interiors according to what they thought the interiors should look like, rather than what they were actually like. But I've got pictures and video of what they actually look like.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to support Steve's mission and Annie's mission and to bring this film on an international level, we do welcome your financial support. We do have envelopes. We are 501c Ararat Museum or Creative Armenia, and then we'll pass the funds to them. In order for Steve to put his 15,000 slides,
and 20,000 pictures and maybe several hundred hours of video. But the other things are all in slides, and they're difficult to access now, and I can't put them online unless I scan them. And there's a few things more laborious and time-consuming than scanning slides manually. I've got about at least 17,000 slides still to be digitized, maybe more actually.
So we welcome your support, and we'll pass the funds to Ani, and so to bring this on more international level. And Ani, can you tell about the documentary that you wanted to participate in New York? That maybe this documentary could be possibly there, the one that you were going to go with Steve.
Well, there are many places where this documentary could go. That's one of them. But there are film festivals and there are different television outlets where this could potentially show. But as Maggie has pointed out, it does need support. So there are many film festivals where it could go, and it could go to different television outlets. And when that happens, and more people see it, well, then more people know our story, and there are more stories that I'm working on. Thank you, Maggie, for offering to make this a tax-deductible donation, and I welcome partners who would also get credit in the film. I'm happy to work with anyone who's interested, foundation or individually, where you will be recognized in the film. You will be doing a service to our people, but I think also to humanity. And Creative Armenia, through a Skidja Museum, it would be kind of to preserve our past, and Creative Armenia is another nonprofit that is really catapulting the Armenians in the arts into the future and into the spotlight. And they also have kindly offered to receive tax-deductible donations that would help support the finishing of this film. So thank you very much, Maggie.
I wanted to invite Armin Oroyan. Armin, would you like please to come here? He's the reason that we are all in here. And I'm sure if I say stand up, there'll be a lot of people in here who have taken the tour with Armin. Armin, please don't be shy. All right, this concludes our event. We do have a light reception downstairs. Everyone is welcome. So again, thank you very much.